This is episode 2 of the 5-Year Fade, the show on which we seek to understand how a woman who married into one of the wealthiest families in Britain was left after a divorce with £0 and living in an Airbnb in the home counties. Now, at the end of the last episode, we told you about what we refer to as the pantomime hearing. That hearing on the 15th of February 2024 at the Central Family Court on High Holborn in London, when Hazel was carried out and taken off to hospital, and they finished the hearing anyway. Total contravention of her human rights, her rights under disability legislation, and also an offence under common law misconduct in public office by the judge, who was, it's agreed, called Robinson. But which Robinson? That's the question. Now, Hazel thinks it was this guy, Graham Robinson. He's a circuit judge from the Northeastern Circuit. He's retired now, actually, but he wasn't then. He did not have a ticket to sit at the Central Family Court. He wasn't a family judge. Hazel believes that he came down from Leeds, sat here in this court outside his jurisdiction. Her evidence for that is that on the 18th, on Sunday, you can see from this screen grab, she was doing some research after this hearing, trying to find out what had happened, and she came across this picture of him and she screen grabbed it. Now, that's quality evidence. She was in court on the Thursday, she was at home on the Sunday, 3 days later, and she recognizes his picture and she takes a screen grab. That's good evidence, eyewitness account, but there is a differing account. This is Edward Hess. He's another judge, and I went along to another hearing not so long ago. I wanted to go and watch the hearing. Edward Hess wouldn't let me. In the end, he asked me to leave, but before he did, he and I had a conversation about Hazel's case, and he told me that it was Richard Robinson who presided over the pantomime hearing. My words, not Edward Hess's, but his evidence isn't as good quality because this is what he actually said to me. Have a look at this. I am as confident as I can be that the judge who dealt with the case in February 2024 was His Honour Judge Richard Robinson, Edward Hess says. Indeed, he has told me that himself and also told me that he was qualified to sit in retirement that day. Now, that's a strange sentence if you look at it, because in the second half, he's saying, I've spoken to him. He'd actually told me earlier in the hearing that he knew Richard Robinson very well. He says, I've spoken to him. He's told me that he was sitting here that day, but he qualifies it at the beginning with, I am as confident as I can be. Well, if Richard Robinson's given him assurances, why can't he just be completely confident? He's qualifying what he's saying so that later on, if he has to say he never made that claim, he can do so. This is not the language of someone who is confident in the facts. I mean, essentially, he's saying that Richard Robinson might be lying to him and he wants to reserve that position. Contrast Hazel, she's absolutely certain that the man she saw on the 15th was Graham Robinson, who she saw in a picture 3 days later. So we've got two differing accounts, and that means as investigators we have to look at motive. Now, I'd always struggled with a motive for Richard Robinson. This is a sort of tweedy old buffer. He's a teacher, essentially. He was teaching law at the Judicial College, and he did a bit of judging as well. But he's retired. He's a pipe and slippers type of guy, is the impression I get. I can't really see what his motive would be to get on a train up to London from Kent or wherever he lives and start hearing cases outside his jurisdiction and committing offences that could land him in prison. I've never understood his motive. What this episode is about, though, is Graham Robinson's motive, because he does have one. And it goes back to some legal research that Rod Walker, the patriarch of this family, asked Hazel to do back in 2015.
They'd got some assets held inside a dissolved company. These assets in this dissolved company couldn't be taken out for some reason. I didn't understand what the law was on that. I just knew that there'd been a time limit where you could or you couldn't take these assets out. And I was told that there was substantial assets that were in this company that they couldn't get back out.
And then come 2019, Phillips asked you for a divorce, and you're doing some research, but you were already quite frightened about what was going on. Just explain to me why that was.
Yeah, what had happened was obviously for many years I was under the impression that we were just about keeping our head above water. You know, we were virtually bankrupt. Philip's father had written a letter, you know, as far back as 2013 saying we had to sell our house and that, you know, we were virtually bankrupt. So, you know, I thought we were having difficulties financially. And then when he asked for a divorce, I came across documents that showed that there was lots of money that I knew absolutely nothing about, you know, millions of pounds going into and out of tax returns and bank accounts. And I was really frightened by that. I had no idea about that money. I didn't know where it came from. So I just thought, God, I've got to try and find out where this money came from. And that's when I started trying to find out what companies were involved and you know, what was going on. And that's when I came across this company that had been discussed years earlier.
PF Polton, you're talking about this company, PF
That's
Polton.
right. I'd gone through all different aspects of the companies that I knew that we were involved in, and I'd found this one, and it was the only one, and it had been put back on the register in 2016. Now, I'd been having conversations with them in 2015, and then this company had been put back on the register because obviously there were assets in it that they couldn't get out. And I didn't know whether that was right or wrong or whether they were allowed to do that. But all I knew was that there was a lot of money and I'd been asked to be involved in research, and I just didn't want to be involved in anything I didn't know anything about, especially these high amounts of money. I'd never seen that amount of money before in my life, you know, so it was scary.
And you realised, didn't you, that they got this company back on the register using quite a specific legal mechanism.
I realised that there'd been, you know, there had to be some sort of court procedure to put the company back on the register. So I contacted the court. It took me nearly a year to actually get the documents. The court kind of gave me the runaround quite a lot. But I eventually got them. And when I got the documents, I was shocked actually because there appeared to have been a personal injury claim that had been used to put this company back on the register. And my research had shown me that that was one of the mechanisms that
Right.
you
So
could use
let
to
me
put a
just
company back
understand
on the
that, Hayes.
register.
You're saying that if a company that had been dissolved needed to be sued, that was one way to put it back on the register, and that's what had happened with
Exactly.
this company, PF Polton. But you thought it was a bogus claim, basically. That's what you're saying.
I did.
Why is
Yeah, I
that?
did
Why
because
were you so sure that there was something off with it?
well, when I looked at the documents, that there was the particulars of the claim, which is what the claimant would fill in. They were just completely blank. There was just nothing on the particulars. It was just a blank claim form. So it just appeared that to me, on its face, it just seemed that what had happened was they couldn't get the company back on the register, so
Hmm.
they created a bogus personal injury claim. And what it appeared to be was that the court just waved it through
Right.
because
It had been nodded through by
the
this judge whose name was.
Judge Kelly.
What did you do when you realised that something slightly whiffy had gone on with this company going back on the register?
Well, I just did some research to find out who I should report to, and I found out I could make something called a protected disclosure, and I did that, and I was told to report to a company called Farrer and Co, who handled dissolved companies for companies in that area.
A solicitor called Farrers. You were told that a solicitor called Farrers handle this kind of regulatory issue
Yes,
within.
that's right.
Right.
Yeah. I reported, as I say, in around about May 2019. I made a full disclosure. It's called a protected disclosure.
Now, a protected disclosure should have afforded Hazel's information a special particular legal protections under whistleblowing legislation. Farrers is a very old and prestigious law firm. It's about 300 years old. They've been advising the royal family for decades, and they are the standing solicitors to the Duchy of Lancaster. And that is why Hazel's concerns about this fraud ended up with the Duchy of Lancaster, because the business in question, PF Polton, was inside the duchy geographically. It's registered to an address in Liverpool. So Hazel put that protected disclosure in. Farrers didn't do anything about her concerns, but what they did do, astonishingly, was in 2022, they started representing her husband in her divorce proceedings, and they revealed the contents of her protected disclosure to him. Now, there's so many problems with that, I don't even know where to begin. A total conflict of interest. And we will come back to that in due course. But for now, I just want to stay focused on these two judges, Siobhan Kelly and Graham Robinson. So 2024, Hazel's been beaten up during this pantomime hearing by Graham Robinson. Not literally beaten up, but he's abused her quite badly in court. And she's online recovering, trying to find out why he might have done this, what reason he might have had for having such an animus against her effectively. And she finds this. It's some sort of conference report on a website called SHU Law. That's Sheffield Hallam University Law. It's some kind of a junior law association at Sheffield Hallam University. Now, this website isn't there anymore. It's been taken down. We've got the Wayback Machine, though. We found this. It was written by a young lady called Emily Ward, a level 5 law student in 2022. And it's talking about Graham Robinson and another judge called Siobhan Kelly. And later on in the article, Emily Ward says this: we ended up with a lecture by Judge Robinson and later followed by questions accompanied by his wife, Judge Kelly. And it was around the same time that Hazel found this photo, and that's when she realised that the judge who had helped her father-in-law out with an apparent fraud in 2016 was married to a judge who had come down to London and perpetrated another fraud against her in court 8 years later. When you realised that Siobhan Kelly, who had helped Rod out in 2016, was married to Graham Robinson, who was beating you up in court in 2024, what went through your mind, Hayes?
Well, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I mean, I was so afraid when I saw that, and I realised everything fell into place for me. Everything made sense of why he was and why he was there. So it
But you
really,
realised he had a motive, is what you're saying.
it did, and it terrified me. I quite genuinely, I was really scared because it explained everything to me, who he was, why he was there.
And it does pull back the curtain on how these judges communicate and coordinate, right down to that some of them are married to each other. And they're not the only married couple amongst the judiciary that we've been looking at. We don't need to talk about the others, but it pulls back the curtain on their involvement with each other and the things they're prepared to do on each other's behalf.
I was trying to make sense of what was happening and why it had happened. And when that, the penny dropped, if you like, I realised that there was much more to it than I could ever imagined, really. And that's why I was so afraid.
Now, we aren't surprised that Hazel is frightened. She's just told you three things. One, she made a protected disclosure under whistleblowing legislation to the King's solicitor about some crimes, and they took it straight to the criminals and disclosed it. Two, her father-in-law and ex-husband committed a fraud in 2016 involving a bogus personal injury claim to get a company back on the register, and that was facilitated by a judge. Number three, another judge who was married to the judge in two came down to London 8 years later and committed another fraud against Hazel in court that involved trampling all over her human rights and her disability rights and throwing her case under the bus when she wasn't there to defend it. So like we say, we're not surprised that she is frightened, and we would urge you all to share this, talk about it, get people to understand the absolute extent of the crimes that have been committed against Hazel Walker in the courts under the fig leaf of British justice. We are going to keep telling this story. There is lots more to tell. Hazel has all the receipts, and we could not have wished for a better story to illustrate the rot that has completely crept over the entirety of the British justice system.